From a socio-economic point of view, poverty in Africa is falling. Generally, it is falling. If you look at incomes per capita, they are rising. So something positive is happening. But however, inequality is rising. And if you look at the Arab Spring, a large part of the Arab Spring phenomenon is inequality. The closing the space for opportunity. It's about voice and accountability, it's about jobs. But inequality and it's all forms of inequality, gender, income inequality, and so forth. Intra-Africa trade is not rising fast enough. In fact, in my view, it is rather slow. ICT access has increased substantially, largely because of mobile telephony, especially in East Africa and Southern Africa. It's picking up pace in West Africa very, very quickly. And I must say that in the area of water and sanitation, there's very little progress in Africa generally. Agricultural productivity has not improved. But infant mortality is falling. Youth unemployment is very high, and in some countries in Africa, it is as high as 60%. South Africa was sitting at 25%, you go to Sierra Leone, Liberia, it's sitting at 60%. What you really have is child soldiers just waiting for a war to happen, the next war to happen. And that's a challenge we need to deal with. Africa has a shortage of skills. This is very interesting. You have unemployment, even unemployed graduates, and then you have a shortage of skills. So there's clearly a mismatch problem, and that needs to be dealt with. The dropout rate at primary school in Africa is rising. So we're not making progress as far as primary school education is concerned, as long as we're measuring in terms of input and not output. That concerns me. There's work to be done on voice and accountability. That's not improving fast enough. However, I'm delighted that the number of what we call fragile states has dropped substantially in the last 20 years. Cost of doing business has fallen, absolutely, and the time to start a business has fallen. Africa actually is one of those regions that is growing rather fast. And in fact, it is one region that recovered very quickly out of the financial crisis. And the question is why? There are many reasons, both internal and external factors. Internal factors of that is about really the quality of economic managers. One of the benefits of the economic reform programs that many African countries undertook in the 1980s was it produced quality economic managers who are running central banks and who are running ministries of finance and other economic ministries. So that's really the dividend from that. And they moved very quickly in instituting counter-cyclical measures during the crisis, and the economies got out. My forecast for Africa's growth going forward for next year is of the order of 4.8%. And by the way, we have a three-track type economic growth. Very high growth in the middle of Africa, in the tropics. Very high growth. Well, by global standards, of course, well over 6% on average. The second tier, which is Southern Africa, South Africa, Swaziland, Madagascar, where the average rate of growth is well below that 6.5% or to 7%. The average rate of growth there is more like 3% to just above 3%. The third track is North Africa, a slowest region because of the Arab Spring, recovery from the Arab Spring. But if you look at Libyan growth, this year and next year, it's going to be the order of 15%, but that's just a technical recovery. Oil is being pumped out again out of the ground from the 700 million barrels a day, whatever they were doing there. It's really moving up quite sharply. What are the drivers of change, of positive transformation in the next 50 years? There are several, and I've categorized them into 4 groups. There's what I call the drivers, global drivers of change in Africa. In the first group, then the physical drivers of change. I see 2 twos, that helps, thank you. And then 3, the human drivers of change, and 4, I put things together, but it's around institutionalization, democracy, and then the role of the private sector in that. That's a bit of a hodgepodge there. So 4 categories of drivers of change. There's going to be a shift in global trade by year 2060, where currently 30%, maybe just about that now, of trade is being due to emerging markets. By year 2060, the emerging economies, including Africa, will account for 70% of global trade. So it's a complete tectonic shift to emerging markets. The middle class is growing globally, and currently we're looking at almost 740 million people, and it's going to go up. And the size of the middle class in Africa right now is just about 300 million people, and it's going to rise quite rapidly in the next 50 years. Manufacturing goods will become even more valuable, and knowledge will become very important. So those economies that invest in knowledge and knowledge products will do best. Biotechnology around agriculture will become very important. We are going to have a gene revolution in Africa. Innovations around health will also become yet another technological driver within Africa. We know the health system in South Africa, how sophisticated it is for private individuals who can afford it, frankly. But in the rest of Africa, there's issues around the health provision. And this is where we think the biggest innovation is going to come from, in terms of technological innovation. Also, we are going to see development around the energy. It's already happening. Solar energy, solar farms are mushrooming everywhere. Geothermal energy, there's also some investment, especially in the Rift Valley in Kenya, because we've got water, in the Rift Valley it's hot, so you drill one hole and another, water gushes out, drive turbines, take it back when it cools, reheat it by the earth, and that's how you generate electricity. I'm putting it simply. There are experts who can explain that better than I've just done. So in other words, moving to a low carbon economy is going to be a source of technological innovation that will impact Africa. Now, the rules of the game also globally will change. A lot of these preferential agreements will disappear, as the world becomes more integrated. One of the most important things that will happen, aid flows to Africa will diminish. So if you take the remittances plus foreign direct investment, FDI, plus normal portfolio flows, aid will diminish, and it should diminish. It's a good thing. And aid will eventually just focus on what we call fragile states, countries coming out of conflict, where they still need better support in terms of building institutions. That's where a lot of the aid will go. Physical drivers of change really pertain to global warming, where we know that in terms of temperature increases, 3.6 degrees in the hottest parts of Africa, and then 3.2 degrees in the coolest parts of Africa. That's what will happen due to global warming. In terms of natural resources, Africa is going to discover more natural resources. So there will be more discoveries of natural resources. In fact, our understanding and our belief is that Africa is going to discover half of its mineral resources. More will be discovered, and the key is prospecting technology. That's what will drive these discoveries. So, land and water, there will always be pressure on land and water. In fact, as I speak, up to 400 million Africans are at risk from water shortage. So this will become an issue under natural resources. Deforestation, we need to worry about that. Now, the big issue here under physical drivers is really the infrastructure deficit. This is missing roads, missing rail, whatever needs to be done on infrastructure, missing ports. The gap that goes unfunded every year is about $45 billion. So every year Africa needs an extra $45 billion to fund the current gap, as we know it, to support the economies as they are. And this is constraining economic growth by much as 3%. So the infrastructure deficit needs to be funded, and when that happens, that's going to be a big driver of change. The one area where there's a huge deficit is in the energy sector in Africa. I'm sure you travel a lot somewhere in Africa, some power can happen in 2-3 hours. So even in Nigeria alone, I know that power cuts are responsible for a drop of as much as 30% in economic productivity. So in other words, if you just stop the power cuts, Nigeria's productivity will grow by another 30% from the current levels. So it's a big issue. I do not believe Africa can really improve its intra-Africa trade within Africa. Why? Because the manufacturing base in most African countries outside South Africa is small. So there's very little to trade among African countries themselves. They produce quite a lot of mineral resources, export, and so forth. That's what will happen. So in terms of regional trade, we should focus on, of course, goods and services. That's fine, which will never increase in my view. But movement of people. Because the diaspora within Africa moves a lot of money around. And to me, as long as they're moving money around, it's part of the economy. It's part of the regional economy. And number 3 is intra-Africa investment. That intra-Africa investment, to me, is far more valuable, far more impactful than worrying about selling goods among African countries. So this is a belief that I think that we look at intra-Africa trade the wrong way. The way to do it is to add movement of people and movement of capital. By year 2060, there will be 2.7 billion Africans. This is one region that will add more people than any other region in the world in the next 50 years. It's Africa. It's going to add another billion people. It's going to be high. So there's what we call a delayed demographic dividend. It's both a threat, but it's also an opportunity. And the youth bulge out of this is going to be a challenge to manage, I can assure you. But of course, I spoke earlier about the middle class is going to grow. Within that, there's a large middle class, which is a boon. And then there will be increased urbanization. I'll show you some charts. A lot of people are going to move to the cities. So we need to worry about whether our cities can carry more people. More people will migrate, by the way, around Africa and outside Africa. And it's not a bad thing. Especially if they're bringing $50 billion a year. In terms of revenue, it's not a bad thing. What we need to figure out is how to harness their skills, how to harness these resources through bonds, diaspora bonds that help manage these resources in a better way rather than family targeted, but maybe pay for a road through a diaspora bond or something like that. Interest levels will rise. I think that there will be more investment in the universities, and certainly I'm already seeing universities coming back up, Makerere, Uganda, Montana University, University of Nairobi, Ibadan. You're already seeing, policymakers making a drive to improve quality of education. So I think generally, things will get better in the education sector. On disease, the 8th issue, prevalence, will come down. It will come down. You're already seeing changes. It will come down. And the idea is to make sure the governments, they carry on doing what they do. And by the way, the land pressure is going to increase. That's partly a human issue. And I really think that unless Africa tackles land issues the right way, we cannot transform agriculture. You see, as long as rural people have no title, and the right way title, they have no collateral. They can't even bulk up to create much bigger farms because you don't know what you own, maybe it's owned by the chief or whatever. There's a whole complex sociological system which some of you are better at explaining. And to me, unless you try to deal with that, you're not going to get the right green revolution and transformation in agriculture. But that's a challenge for all of us to try to think about. Now, let me deal with the last part, driver of change. This hodgepodge of private sector, democracy, and institutions. The private sector is important, and believe it or not, almost in all the countries in Africa, the private sector is the largest part of the economy, even if it's informal. Some countries have a large informal sector, but it's private. The informal sector is not government owned. So the private sector is important, and we need to recognize that. And we need to support it. That's the only way to create jobs and deal with the youth bulge issue. We need to support small to medium scale enterprises. On democracy, democracy is taking root in Africa. The number of fragile states is falling, as I said. And in 2011, 18 countries in Africa were considered to be truly democratic. 18 countries. It's not a small figure, it's a large figure given where Africa has come from. But voice and accountability is still a challenge. The Arab Spring is a good example of that. Demands for jobs and justice. There's a need to improve the quality of institutions, and this impacts on economic growth. And regulatory environment is improving, and we know that is supportive of economic growth. The impact of all these drivers of change, all the nice things I've said, some of the not so nice things, is rather robust economic growth. And just showing you here the real GDP growth and per capita growth in the next 50 years. So currently we're sitting at these kind of rates of growth. So 5%. And then it's going to rise. Of course, here I've kind of averaged it out, but it's going to rise to the average of 7-ish%. In fact, already 10 of the fastest growing countries in the world right now are in Africa. Now, the policy responses in terms of to realize this vision, what should authorities do, what should governments do? And here, I think I'm proposing that we should follow the path of inclusive growth, which really speaks about equal access or equitable access to opportunity.